Let us move on to the next one, which is the wildlife. So here Arctic is full of wildlife. We will see first from the polar bears, seals, walrus and the whale population. So there is a declining population of these animals, these mammals, due to the habitat loss, that means sea ice decline, and other threat associated with the climate change. And similarly, the Arctic fox population is also being affected. Although it remains relatively stable, but because in the food web, they are also part of the food web. So when there is a habitat change, reindeers are not available, hares are not available, then the fox population is getting affected because of the non-availability of the prey for these kind of small predators. They also face challenge. Arctic fox face challenge due to the habitat changes and the competition from the other predators. And birds is the next one which we will look into. So the Arctic serves as an important breeding ground for various birds. There are plenty of migratory birds which come from the south to Arctic region. This keeps changing year by year due to the food availability and weather conditions. Some years the Arctic is very cold, so in those years the migratory birds won't come. Whereas in some other years it will be very warm, so there will be plenty of migratory birds which are visiting Arctic. What are the threats and conservation status for this wildlife? There are threats like habitat loss, pollution, overhunting and climate change. All these things affect the wildlife in the Arctic. In the previous module we had seen about conservation of Arctic flora and fauna, CAFF. So they are one of the major group which is responsible for the conservation effects, which include establishment of protected areas, sustainable management practices and international agreements aimed at addressing common conservation challenges. Due to their efforts, there is a little bit conservation happening in the Arctic region, especially for the wildlife. And when we talk about migration, caribou or reindeer migrates during the winter seasons. There are birds and whales which also migrate to the Arctic region. And since the Arctic region is extremely cold, there is a lot of adaptation by the various wildlife that exist in the Arctic. For example, there is an extra insulation to stay warm for the musk oxes, a lack of fur pigmentation to get camouflaged in the white snow for Arctic fox, doll sheep, polar bears and Arctic owl. All these animals and birds exist like a white creatures, that is, they can easily blend with the Arctic snow. And 2 toes and 2 large dew claws for the caribou or reindeer to walk in the snow. The gold eyes in summer and blue in winter to see the ultraviolet range for reindeer. So there is a very nice video which talks about this particular effect, because although the lack of fur pigmentation makes Arctic fox white in the eyes, the reindeers have a ultraviolet vision. That means they can actually see the reflected UV rays from the snow, whereas Arctic fox does not reflect any UV, or they do not emit any UV radiation. So they actually appear extremely dark black and the snow is extremely white. So that contrast helps caribou or the reindeer to spot their predator, that is the Arctic fox. So this video clearly tells about that particular thing. And hibernation is another adaptation to the cold climate. So here mainly grizzly bear, Arctic ground squirrel are the 2 species which go into hibernation. Of course, many people talk about polar bear going into hibernation, but generally they don't go into hibernation, especially the pregnant mother polar bears only go into the den and they don't actually hibernate. They reduce their body functioning, because they are going to give birth to new calves and they just rest during that period, during the entire winter. So they don't go into hibernation. So the animals which go into hibernation, what they do, it happens to slow their metabolism and the body temperature actually falls and the heart rate slows down and the breath is more shallow. So that means their entire metabolism is happening at a very reduced rate, maybe around 20% of the actual thing which happens during the summer. And needle leaves and cone-like structure for conifer trees, because they can easily, the needle leaves reduces the evaporation or the water loss, and the cone-like structure makes sure that snow doesn't stick to their leaves. So these are some of the adaptations to the cold climate. And sugary sap for maple is very important, because that also helps them survive during the cold winter. Next one is the melting of ice. So here the melting of ice leads to rising of sea levels. Here we can see the glacier is melting. The melting of glacier causes sea levels to rise. And the second one is the altered ocean currents. So that means the melting of Arctic ice also leads to change of ocean currents. So the cold water flows and it gets warmed during the tropics area, and then again the warm water goes to the cold Arctic region and it also melts some of the ice. So these kind of things are one of the causes for the ice to melt, and this entirely disrupts the ecosystem that exists in the Arctic region. And of course, when we look at the melting of ice, what are all the things which affect is mainly the reduction in the sea ice is basically the extent and the volume. So the volume of Arctic sea ice has declined by more than 50% since 1970. And the Greenland ice sheets are actually losing at an average of 279 billion metric tons of ice per year. And permafrost thaw also releases large amount of captured greenhouse gases like CO2 and methane. And the glacier also undergoes retreats, some glaciers losing several meters of ice thickness per year. And all these things have a greater impact on the ecosystems, like disruption of habitat availability for wildlife and changes in the ocean circulation pattern and alteration in the weather and climate pattern.